the big picture, you know, for the recording. But you know, if you can just pick up on some of those things that you commented on in your letter and other things, really. But you know, with just that sort of in the back of your mind, we're unique. I mean, Peru is unusual in shutting down for a whole year. It's incredibly huge gaps between the poorest and the most urban areas, and it's, you know, so it's, you know, a little bit of context and some of what you did will be enough. And then let's see if obviously we're talking to quite a few others. You'd know some of the others. You know Charlotte Church, don't you? Used to be a bit of a famous singer. Did all sorts of things. Well, she's now become a mum, you know, and taken one look at the local school in Wales and thought, I'm not having any of that. So she's built a sort of forest school on the sort of Summerhill on steroids, really, on the better description. And of course,
interesting.
So there's a lot of variety in all this, and you'll get to see what the others have all said.
Dear colleagues, dear friends and families of our...
Sorry. Other computer is... I'm supposed to be recording a speech for the graduation ceremony. I mean, it's the bizarreness of what you have to do when everything is online. It's just, it hits you anew every day. It's very strange. But
yeah, I find it's always good to reflect on. I do a few assemblies these days. You can imagine reflect on how tough it is for others. You know, that you think this has been bad. You should see ... You know, is always a good line. You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get on. So we're just going to get just to launch into it. Really, if it looks like you're flagging or you need a bit of redirection, Leslie will chip in, or I will. But by and large, we won't. And we're looking for about 15 minutes or so, which will end up being edited down to, you know, 2 sneezes,
30 seconds.
But that's the way these things are.
Yeah, I think just be like, you know, just speak and say what exactly, because it is going to get cut down anyway. So, I mean,
okay, we're recording, so let's go.
Okay, so in Peru, the school year runs as the same as the calendar year. So we actually started our school year, in fact, on March the 1st, when the students first arrived. And as we started, there were rumors of a virus in other parts of the world. So in the weeks before term started, we did a little bit of preparation for what we thought might happen to us in a month or two by the time it hit us, and we might need to be prepared to do some work online. And it hit us very much more quickly than we thought. Within a week, it was clear that we needed to advance our preparations. And in fact, 10 days into term, I remember I was teaching a theory of knowledge class at the time. And one of my students, who was clearly not paying a word of attention to what I was doing, said, "Have you heard the news, Mr. Binge, that we were all being sent home and we're not allowed to come into school anymore?" So it was, as I say, 10 days into the term. And within 3 more days, all schools were in complete lockdown throughout Peru. And in fact, for the local schools in Peru, for the state schools, that was actually before their term started, because they start a couple of weeks after we do. And schools have been in lockdown ever since, and will remain in lockdown certainly through to the end of this academic year, so through to Christmas. And we have no idea what will happen next year. There are some people in the Ministry of Education who are quite keen to open schools in some form for next March. And then there are people in the Ministry of Health who are still convinced that any kind of agglomeration of people is not going to be feasible. So we won't open schools next March. So at the moment, we're preparing for next year for everything from a fully open school to a hybrid system where kids are in for part of the time to a fully shut down school. So lots of uncertainty. But going back to March when we started, we spent a bit of time faffing about deciding what platforms we would use, and the usual discussions about Zoom and Classroom and Teams and all that kind of stuff. And eventually we decided that actually we just need to make a decision, because whatever we use, we'll learn how to use it. So we did that. And we trained up the experts, who then trained up the rest of the staff very quickly. It was a very steep learning curve for everybody. And we took an early decision, which some of the other schools that we work with in Lima, in Peru, didn't take, which was to reflect the complete curriculum in what we were doing online and to try and make it as full as possible. Other schools said, no, we're going to do what they called the basics, or the core subjects, which basically meant English, Spanish, maths and science, and focus on those. And we thought, no, we wanted to do the arts, we wanted to do PE, we wanted to do the humanities, we wanted to do everything creative as much as we could, design, technology. And of course, some of these subjects present particular challenges. I've been a maths teacher for far too long. And I can teach maths online without any difficulty at all. There's very little challenge to teaching maths over a Zoom classroom and using Google or whatever. But if you're trying to do design technology, that's a bit more difficult. So we had to start to work out interesting ways in which the teachers could engage the students with no equipment at home, or very little, and also very varied amounts of equipment. I mean, some people had quite a few things or had access to them. Others had nothing at all. Some people get outside. They lived in a house with a garden. Quite a lot of them lived in a small flat on whatever floor it was with no outside areas at all. So the challenges for the students to engage and the teachers to engage them varied dramatically across the different subjects that we taught. And of course, they varied at the different ages. And we soon found, and this became a growing trend, we soon found that the older students actually enjoyed the responsibility and the independence. And those who were smart enough to realize that a large percentage of their time in the classroom was boring and uninteresting, realized that they could devote their time to far more interesting things if they were totally in control of it. So the Zoom lessons evolved. They were a bit too didactic at first. There was the tendency for teachers to say, I've got a Zoom class for 45 minutes, therefore I will speak for 45 minutes. I mean, they'd never do that in class. Yeah. So why they thought it was a good idea on Zoom, I have no idea. But so we had to kind of work with that for a while. But for the younger children, the younger they got, that became increasingly difficult. And it was particularly difficult down in the early years, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, where attention span is minimal. Engagement with other people is something that they're trying to learn rather than have already learned. And independence in terms of their study is really non-existent. And you know, you go into an early years class, you know what it's like. I mean, kids are basically playing at different things. And they move from one thing to another, and they're learning through play. How do you do that on a screen when, if you want them to go away and play, they're off the screen and suddenly you've no idea what they're doing? So that became very difficult. And we had, I would say, in common with just about every other school I know, we had the most pushback from parents in those early years who were saying, why am I paying? Because, you know, in Peru terms, our fees are not cheap at Markham College. In Peru terms, as I say, why am I paying these fees for basically 15 minutes and then I've got to do all the teaching? And I'm sure many other schools can record that as well. So that became a massive challenge. What the early years team did quite early on, I suppose, was to realize that they needed to find a different solution for what they were doing. And rather than attempt to do what they did at school, which is to teach the child and then hand them back to the parents and ignore what goes on at home, because what goes on at home is so varied, they needed to try and engage the parents and support the parents. So we moved from the concept of the unique child to the concept of the unique family. And that meant that we spent as much, if not more, eventually time doing webinars and chat sessions and coffee mornings and afternoon talks with the parents about their child's development, what they were looking for, what they could be looking for, and trying to support them so that the parents felt that they were learning to support their child better. They still felt they were paying more than they should be for what they were getting, but you know, that's normal. And I think that worked tremendously. And we've done a lot of surveys. Parents appreciated the fact that we did regular surveys. Coincidentally, we appointed some partners to help do our surveys for us, who've been fantastic, a local company. And they've put together some great surveys. So we've sent out many of those to parents, to students, to staff. We've been able to plot the trend of satisfaction with the program as we've gone through the year. And the biggest changes have certainly been in early years, where it was uniformly negative to now pretty much uniformly positive, which has been a big step in the right direction. The response to the surveys with the older kids has always been extremely positive. They've liked the fact that their kids are engaged. They like the fact there's a routine. It's an important part of what we do to understand the importance of the routine and the activities. So I'll move on to a different point. One of the other concerns that we had from parents was, this is not what we paid for. This is not like school when your kids come into school. And of course, it's true. It isn't. It's dramatically different from that. But we thought about that, and we thought about what we were doing. And what we realized is that within the context of that the families were faced with, which of course is dramatically different from the context that they're normally faced with, that what we were providing was as valuable and important as it would have been had they been at school in a different context. And what I mean by that is that these families have very often not spent anything like as much time together.
Is it frozen?
Yeah, hang on.
I think Chris is frozen. Yeah. Might get the connection back.
That's really interesting, isn't it?
He might come back in.
Oh, Chris, you froze.
Back in the room.
You froze then.
Okay, sorry. I'm using a Chromebook, and I'm not sure it's got the oomph for this, but we'll try.
Well, it's all pretty good up to that point, and no, it absolutely flows nicely, and then a little bit of a pause. You were just
you talk about families not spending as much time together. That's where this is the last time.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take it from there. So the strain that families are under, because they don't normally spend as much time together, has been quite significant. And particularly for these young people who are used to getting out of their home to school, being out on the football field or down on the beach surfing, as we spend a lot of time doing in Peru, and being with their friends and all that social education that they're getting just by being with other people. They're now replacing that with being locked up with the same 3 or 4 people, or 4 or 5 if it's a larger family, for long periods of time. And remember, in Peru, this has gone on months and months since the middle of March. So that's a tremendous strain. So whilst it's true that the education that we're providing and the environment that we provide when they're at school is very different from what we're providing now, I think within the context that the families are in at the moment, what we're doing is just as valuable. And what we've seen is that we've been able to provide a routine that otherwise wouldn't be there. That routine is a sense of normality. The kids get up and they have to be at registration at 7:30 in the morning, or they'll get a phone call or a letter home, as they would if they were at school. They have to attend a timetable of lessons, which might be different. They have to complete assignments. And that routine actually provides a bedrock on which they can live the rest of their lives, and enables them to be able to negotiate the common areas and the common spaces, because they've got something that they're trying to do. I read an article a while back, which slightly dramatically says, does online education save lives? But I think that we know that around the world, there have been mental health issues caused by confinement. And I think some of the things that we've been doing as a school have counteracted that and enabled students to have some kind of interaction, some kind of routine that has helped some of them avoid perhaps some of the depression that they would have hit otherwise. Of course, we know that we still do have children, and we were trying to keep contact with the parents and the children as much as possible who are struggling, who are finding it very difficult. But as many of those who are finding it difficult, there are probably more who are actually reaping the benefits and rising to the challenge and possibly doing even better. We see, for example, academic standards in many areas have actually improved. The work that my class, my Theory of Knowledge class for the IB diploma has produced this year exceeded the expectations I had of them last year quite significantly. Why is that? I think because they were handed independence and responsibility and told to get on with it, and they've loved it. And they've been able to plan their learning and plan what they're doing with a level of independence that they otherwise wouldn't have done. But we've noticed a couple of interesting trends. And again, from what I gather, this is mirrored around the world. Whilst the better are doing better, the worse are doing worse, and the spread of achievement is broad. So we're now looking at what do we need to do to be able to counteract that trend and help those weaker ones and spend more time with those weaker ones. And we'll for the next academic year, we'll come up with solutions for that. Another interesting trend, and this has been a very small survey that one teacher did with his own classes, but he's noticed that the girls have responded better than the boys. And so we want to try and see if that's general across other subject areas. This was particularly true in design technology and of one class. So interesting to see whether that happens across other areas and why that might be, and whether we need to rethink what we're doing if we're still in lockdown next year, which we anticipate we will be partially. So that's been a trend. And
you've done some next? Quite zany things, haven't you? You've had a
we have.
The playful things are lovely for it, you know.
Yeah. One of the things that the school is known for is its extracurricular and its outdoor education program. Typically, our children would spend a week in the Amazon jungle, or they'd spend a week in the mountains, or they'd spend a week in the Sacred Valley, or they'd do all these kinds of things and have some quite challenging and exciting areas. The older children would be the leaders for the younger children. So there's a lot of mixed age interaction happening in those areas. And of course, none of that was able to happen because they're all locked up. So once we'd got the broad curriculum working for the first, we have a 4-term year. For the first sort of term and a half, we concentrated on the things within the curriculum. And then we started to expand more and add on an extracurricular activities program. And then add on some kinds of replacements for these outdoor experiences, which meant things like campouts and sleepovers for the younger children. And that's been fascinating. All of these, of course, have happened in the living room or in the bedroom, but we've been able, again, to mix the older kids and the younger kids and introduce the slightly offbeat alternatives to the things that we would normally do. So our 12-year-olds would be going whitewater rafting, not in a week away from Lima. So somebody came up with the idea of whitewater rafting in your living room. So we've done whitewater rafting in the living room. Everybody sits on a chair. They're taught how to make a paddle out of a broomstick and a toilet roll, and they're told what to wear if they're whitewater rafting. So they've all got a helmet on. They've got. I did it on one of the first ones as well. I sat there and did it as well, and then what you get is a video of the run down the whitewater stream at Lunawana, which is not far south of Lima. And you get one of our assistant principals shouting at them about, row to the right and row backwards on the left, and, gives them all the instructions, and everybody's going like this and then like that. And then what we tried to arrange on the first one was that the parents would then come up at the end with a bucket of water and throw it over the kids, which I think happened to some people, but it didn't happen to all. I'm not sure whether we're still doing that, but they love it. But they love the whitewater rafting because it's just so daft. we had a synchronized swimming competition as well, which students did in their living room. And that was great fun. And all of these experiences are capped off at the end by the campfire, where they sit round and one of our more egotistical members of staff sings the traditional Markham campfire song, and everybody joins in. And kids absolutely love it. And then they watch a movie. And what was so nice, one of the first ones we did it with I suppose they were the 9 or 10-year-olds. And they were in small groups, and they had a 15-year-old working with them as a leader, leading them through these activities. What was so nice at the end of the evening, the younger ones said, "Will you stay and watch the movie with us?" to the older ones. So I don't know what they were watching, Madagascar or something, or some child-related film that they all enjoyed watching. And the older ones stayed and watched them with them, and they chatted. And of course, being the generation that they were all double screening. So they were WhatsApping each other, and with the guidance of these older kids about what was going on in the film that they were watching. So that was great fun. And of course, then you get to some of the advantages that you can have when you're online that you can't do otherwise. So for many of these, we managed to get a guest speaker to come in and talk about their adventures and their explorations. And these guest speakers were all over the world. We weren't limited to the people we could find in Peru. I mean, there's some great people in Peru, don't get me wrong, but we managed to find some really interesting people that our outdoor ed team knew from their past experiences. And we had our kids asking them questions about, what was it like when you did whatever it was you did, and flew over this or jumped over that or climbed up that or whatever. And that opened up boundaries in a quite exciting and intriguing way, and that's been great fun as well. So yeah, we keep trying to come up with new and dafter ideas to keep the kids engaged and involved, so that they still see school as an exciting addition to their lives, for the academic program they're getting engaged in, and everything else that we can offer and put on as well.
Yeah,
Chris, exactly. That's a wonderful glimpse into the window of the world that's Peru, and in particular, Mark. I mean, I love the place to bits anyway. I'm just amazed at the progress you've made in a year, really. That's, I mean, that would have been a decade of work, wouldn't it, before the COVID thing? And then suddenly, everybody's piling in. Lisa and I were in a thing yesterday with a chap who runs the education innovation research team in Harvard, and he was saying there's been more professional development, more collaboration, more ingenuity than he's seen in a lifetime of leadership. So it's pretty good. But I think I'd put my money on Markham to have come through as you have, really.
It's interesting. I mean, the same thing is true with professional development. And we were due at the end of March to go to a Latin American Heads Conference in Uruguay. And typically we send we take maybe 4 members of staff, possibly 5 if we can afford it, to fly all the way to Uruguay and spend a nice few days on one of the best beaches on the planet, and sitting in a nice hotel and listening to speakers, and we pay to the LAHC for the cost they have of bringing these possibly 4 outstanding speakers across from the world to be there. And then we come back, and we all know the dangers of the trickle-down effect of educational knowledge when you go to these conferences. Very little of it gets passed on and shared to other people, and what does falls on barren ground anyway. So that's the typical thing. We're looking forward to going. I mean, I love Punta del Este in Uruguay. It's one of my favorite places in the world, but of course we couldn't go. And what happened in the end, it was rescheduled for October, because we were all absolutely convinced that our lockdown would last a month at most. By the time we got to October, the LAHC team, and they did a fantastic job, said, no, well, it's got to be an online conference. They had a small budget left from the original one. So they managed to make the conference free to everybody who wanted to join. So that was great. And of course, what that meant was we could advertise that to all of our staff. So more than 100 of our staff could go to the conference, whereas normally it's 4. So that's a big improvement. And secondly, we could have people that we wouldn't otherwise have afforded. So we had John Hattie speaking at the conference. Well, we can't afford John Hattie in Latin America. He's far too expensive. So to have John Hattie speak to us and chat with us and answer questions to the hundreds of people who were able to listen to him was fantastic. So that's great. And then we could do other things. So we were invited to get the students involved in the conference. So we had, for example, our students leading other teachers in other parts of Latin America on a whitewater rafting session. So they could be running parts of the conference as well, or attending parts of the conference. So, I mean, was it a perfect model? No, but it just opened up ways in which we began to think that we could do something differently. So we're going through a debate in the Latin American Heads Conference at the moment. Do we want a conference next year? My view is no. These conferences are dead. They don't need to exist ever again. We can do them for a fraction of the cost, involve far more people, and get a far better dialogue if we do it online.
Yeah, and crucially to engage the students and for that matter the families. I mean, it's I think the genie is out of the bottle for all that. It won't go back in.
No, I hope
not. Least booked me up for a thing in Cambridge University. When was it? A couple of months back, wasn't it, Lisa?
Yeah, September time. Yeah, inadvertently. Yeah.
Yeah, they were sort of. We were chatting beforehand. They said we'd better do a bit of a rehearsal. So I thought, how many people have you got? And they said we've got about 15,000. You know? So I was like, oh, okay. I thought they were going to say 15, but and huge numbers. And the chat window was going past so fast. They had 4 full-time people just collating the questions and the chat. We could never have done that face to face. And as you say, no. I think in a week or so, I'm doing a thing with Michael Fulham. We're in a school talking to the children together. You know, now I don't know what it costs to fly Michael Fulham around the world, but it's probably it's a very large sum of money indeed.
Oh, yeah,
you know?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I've done that one. Yeah, that's expensive.
Well, but he's happy just to pop in and have a bit of a chat and pop out, you know, and it's in the, you know, and for the kids as well, I think it's that flattening of the thing. Listen, that's Chris, that's tons of really useful stuff. And
yeah, can I just ask a few things that I think would kind of put it in context as well?
Sure.
Yeah, surely.
What is the lockdown like in Peru per se for everybody? I mean, over here, you know, there's particular rules. So, for example, you're allowed to go out for a walk to get exercise like once a day. And you're allowed to, you know, when we've got a tier system, you're allowed to meet like another person in your family. Is it very strict, or I mean, just a few sentences really to.
Initially, it was very strict. When it started, it was very strict. So you weren't allowed to go out unless you could demonstrate that you were going to an essential shop. Otherwise, and you certainly weren't allowed to go out in a car. And no, there were no cars on the streets at all. All workplaces, apart from essential shops and health places, were shut down. And essential shops basically meant food, pharmacy, bank. That's it. And there were strict curfews. You were allowed to walk for about half an hour, I think it was originally, but not children. Children were not allowed out at all. Anybody who was declared vulnerable, initially I was declared vulnerable, but then I got younger, so I was no longer vulnerable. They said people over 60 are vulnerable, so I was caught in the vulnerable trap, but then they switched it to 65, so I obviously was feeling better because I'm in the middle of that gap. So I became less vulnerable, but that not allowed out at all, and that lasted a long time. They tried to keep. They had a period where they had gender-based days. So you could only go out as a female on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you could only go out as a male on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. They were trying to avoid families and couples going out together.
Surely.
So that lasted a while. Then they decided that didn't work. Then you were allowed, they opened up some workplaces gradually and slowly. So the workplaces, people are advised still to work from home if they can, but workplaces now, a lot of it has eased. Restaurants have opened, but in a very minor way. There are still curfews. I think it's, well, actually that since I left Peru, that's even lightened, but the curfew, sort of 8 o'clock in the evening for everybody, lasted a very long time, and all of Sunday lasted a very long time. There was no car transport once car transport was introduced back in, no car transport on a Sunday, which was actually quite nice. But that was got rid of by the interim president last week. Whether it'll go back, I don't know. So it was extremely strict. Even now, young children under the age of 12 are not allowed out except for, I think, an hour once a day within 500 meters of their home.
Yeah, that's pretty strict. It is, but your figures have been very good, compared to us. You know?
Well, they were very bad. I mean, overall, our figures are very bad. We've got the highest death rate of any country in the world, I think, or close to it. We certainly did for a long time. But I mean, there are so many factors there. Our healthcare outside the better off end of Lima is pretty atrocious. There were, I think, when we started, 200 ITU beds in the whole country.
Wow.
So obviously they were overloaded very quickly. The government spent a lot and put in a lot, and we're well into the thousands now, but it initially that was the case. So the death rate in some places was horrendous. The medical care in the regions is poor to non-existent, and that's made worse by corruption. So we have a friend who runs a charity that sent a charity's been involved with medical health and support and medical education, particularly for women in the jungle and in the mountains for some years. But they tried to send 10 boxes of medical goods to one of the cities in the jungle, and this is, I think it's the largest city that has no land transport to get to it. You can only really fly in, or you can go up the Amazon from the Brazil side or something. They only one of them got through without being pinched somewhere of these 10 boxes. So, you know, they're being sold on at massively high rates. So there are tremendous obstacles to the health system. So of course, once people get ill, their prognosis in these areas is pretty limited. So our death rate's been very poor, but the incidence rate has gone down significantly, and things are looking a little bit more positive at the moment, certainly than they were. Even
I was looking at the graphs. I mean, it's gone down. You don't seem to have had a second peak at all, as far as I can see. It's just,
well, remember, we're going into summer at the moment, so that's also makes a significant difference. We went through winter during June, July, August, and that's when it was at its worst.
Surely.
And I just wanted to ask you, so how, with the timing with Zoom, so how many hours of Zoom are the children involved with, and have you sort of looked at that? So so I know over here, for example, you know, they've tried to, some of the schools I've worked with have tried to do a fuller curriculum, but they've done less of everything just to kind of have more space in between. Have you found that as well, or?
Yeah, what we found was when we started the Zoom, I mean, we in the upper school, so in the secondary school, they carried on exactly the same timetable. Yeah. In the primary school, they changed the timetable around and changed the emphasis of different subject areas, and had slightly less Zoom time. And in the early years, it was just completely different. But in the secondary school, what we found when we did our first survey is that students and parents were complaining of massive overwork, because what would happen is that teachers would do a Zoom class, and they would set activities during the Zoom class, and the kids wouldn't finish those during the time that they were allocated. So then they'd have to go and finish those. And then they would give them the usual amount of homework as well.
Right.
So they were being heavily overworked. So we banned homework beyond what goes on in the Zoom class for our middle school areas, sort of pre-GCSE age. And we changed, we spend a lot of time talking about what good online learning looks like, and saying, look, that you don't talk all the time. You wouldn't, you give kids time to work, and you give them time to ask you questions, and so it kind of changed the emphasis, and we reduced the workload. So I would say in most areas we haven't really cut down on what we've been trying to do. There are some subjects that will say that we've been able to do less than we would have otherwise done. But it's things like science where they've done fewer practical experiments. It's that kind of thing, really. Others have done just as much as they would have done. We may still be doing too much Zoom, but when you do the surveys, what do the parents like most? The Zoom sessions, because their kids are busy, and somebody else is watching them. There's that element of going to school, which is really basically childcare as far as families are concerned about. And of course, we haven't been able to do any of that. So once the parents got back to work, it became quite difficult for many families.
A big trend in America to do these little sort of bubble groups where they, group of parents, all the kids go to one person's house, and they have a paid tutor looking after 8, 9, 10, 12 children, and then they're doing online learning, but somebody is doing that formal childminding thing, and somebody is a qualified teacher. That's booming in the sort of California at the moment, and so on. So
interesting.
Yeah.
And
they're more set up for home learning in the States, aren't they? That's a much.
I think part of the problem there, I think, is that they've become over dependent on content over there. So content. And you were spot on with the social dimensions of the kids helping each other and the collaborative thing, and the parents being part of that. And I think America hasn't really got that, partly because there's a lot of venture capital has gone into content provision. So a lot of people are marketing their online lessons and rather than their online learning, which is something else, Listen, Chris, we could talk to you about this all day, but we promised you not too long, and I'm kind of conscious we've been twice as long as we promised anyway, but that's been hugely useful. And I'm struggling to know what we did it out of that, to be honest, because it's every flipping sentence was useful and also indicative of a difference. We won't hear that from Charlotte's lot. We won't hear that from. We're talking to Asher next out in one of the gem schools in Dubai, and they've had a very different experience, I think. So, this is what we're looking for, that rich diversity, I think.
Good.
And sometime you and I need to talk about, Markham, I don't know if you want to do that now on the back of this, or you want to make another time. What's best for you?
Let's find a different time. I mean, we unfortunately, both us and the designers put the hands of signing a contract into the hands of lawyers. They've generated an awful lot of work for lawyers, and we still haven't signed the bloody contract, which is the most frustrating thing in my life at the moment. But I got an email today saying it might be ready to sign. So everything has kind of been put slightly on hold. So let me get back to you hopefully at the end of this week, and let's set up a time and see where we can.
Whatever suits. Standing by here, and lots to talk about, really. So okay, listen, thanks heaps for that. That was really. It's easy for me to say it's insightful. You ought to be jolly proud of what you've done over that year. It's pretty impressive. It really is.
Thank you. Yeah, no, which
very,
I think
inspiring. Thank you so much. And I think
when you put your video pitch together, I hope you'll share it with me so I can have a look. And
we'll share it with you before,
Chris.
We'll share it with you before anybody else sees it, other than because if there are nuances or you've regretted the word corruption or whatever.
So I'm not in Peru. I'm safe.
You'll have last call on what goes into that always.
Okay, great. And then and then let me know who you're pitching it to as well. That'll be fun. Okay.
Well, I mean, everybody from Netflix through Discovery, but Channel 4 were our starting point, and
okay, great.
We're hoping for a global audience. And of course, it might all go wrong anyway. Yeah, fingers
Well,
crossed.
you've got to try, haven't you? You know, try and get pedagogical interest on the telly box. You know, that people want to watch. So let's do it. Let's try.
Good luck. Good luck with it.
No, it's all right. Thanks, mate. Talk soon.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Wow, wasn't that impressive, eh? Gosh.
So